thank goodness for Dan Lanning in Oregon, because initially it was like, okay, here come UCLA and USC. Like USC is going to be one of these programs that's going to help lift the league. And that's just not where USC is right now. But Oregon absolutely is there. And so, again, from this Midwestern perspective of this, like, Oregon is like awesome. It's not like, oh no, Oregon came to beat these teams. It's like, welcome. Like, let's go. Let's play great games. Ohio State, Oregon was an awesome game. And then you're one of us now. So, like, go kick some booty in the playoff, man. Like, go Ducks.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I am your host, Yogi Roth, always joined by Jim Thornby, and it's a version of our postseason. And of course, it's kind of like midseason. If you look at the playoffs, we still got a long time before the end of the season. We'll truly be here. And today we have a very special guest in Doug Lesmerises from Kings of the North. It's a phenomenal media platform, great content, big time podcast, talking all things college football from the lens of the North, just like we come at you from the lens of the West Coast. We got championship games set up. Hello, Arizona State. Hello, Oregon Ducks. I think we should say hello to SMU just because they were almost in the Pac-12, like a couple hours away from being in the Pac-12, Jim. And
so close.
You still, yeah, so who knows? Who knows what would have happened if all that happened?
I already started doing some Rhett Lashlee research at that point. But
there we go. Hey, yeah. Texas, they're 16 years away from, whatever it was, 15 years away from, 14 years away from potentially being in the Pac-12, depending who you want to listen to. But regardless, it's championship week. We got a lot to look back upon. We also have our final regularly season awards presented by our founding partner, 76. So before we get to that, Jim, I just want to see if you feel refreshed. How are you doing with the regular season and 14 weeks behind us?
I'm good. Although I would say, like, I probably got a little overheated over the weekend watching all these post-game brawls.
Oh my God.
It's like, come on, guys. Like, and I mentioned to you about this off the air. Like, I remember earlier in the season when Penn State won at SC, and a couple of Penn State players tried to plant the flag on there, and James Franklin right away ran away and took the flag. It's like, this ain't happening. And kind of disappointed I didn't see more of that from head coaches this weekend. I'll leave it at that.
Kind of. I'll say this.
I'm trying to not come on overly strong here, but like that.
I will come on overly strong for you.
Yeah.
I have no problem doing that. Like, we all saw what happened. Like, even my kids were like enthralled with the brawl. Like, my oldest son was like, "Dad, can I watch the video?" And I'm like, "Sure, dude. Here we go. This is how not to act after a game." Right. But the country saw it, the nation saw it, and most importantly, every administrator knew it. It was the biggest thing going on Saturday. And then as we saw games happen, rivalry games happen throughout the rest of the day into the evening, it's like, to me, and I'm sure they try, but it was like, beef up security, make sure, like, just whatever it takes, man. Like, we love the spirit of the game. I know I love field crowd rushing out of the field more than you do, Jim. I think it's amazing. I love seeing it in college football, but there has to be a point, especially when you're on the road, where like the safety thing is a thing. And it's a horrible look. It was so bad for me that, like, when I came out of that epic clash between Ohio State and Michigan, I had the worst taste in my mouth. Kind of like Joel Klatt said on the broadcast, like, it's just an ugly look for the sport. And it was. It took away from the game. It took away from the win. And it's not okay. And my biggest problem is that those schools and those brands influence schools and brands and high schools and Pop Warner and so many people. So you watch it and there's a world where you think it's okay. That's why I hate coaches going psychopath on the sideline and screaming at officials, because high school coaches think that's okay. And then youth coaches and parents think that's okay. I've witnessed it as a flag head coach in Southern California. I've seen the worst of parents pretty much every weekend. And I think that there needs to be examples. I just do. So I'm really passionate about that. I hated seeing it. Thankfully, nobody got, like, at least as far as we know, dramatically hurt. There wasn't, God forbid, something tremendously serious. And then there was innocent bystanders. Like, reporters are down there and they're getting maced. Like, I'm seeing, like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
What are
like,
we doing?
I'm a huge fan of, like, the pregame smack talk.
You like that?
Through the
Arizona
through
State.
the pressers.
Smith,
I love all that. Like, that's like, just keep your distance, whatever. Like, don't be a clown on the field. But if you want to have some fun, especially like in a smart and clever way before the game, and even in a smart and clever way after the game, if you win and you're on the post game podium and you want to have some fun, but still be respectful in a sense, like, all for it. But like, the stuff of like whether it's planting a flag or someone goes in there like start ripping up the field at midfield over the logo, like, to me, and maybe I'm just getting older, but to me that's just kind of a clown move.
Yeah, it's just a lack of discipline is really what it is. You can preach it all day long, but it shows up in a bunch of ways. So enough time on that. Let's move on because some really cool performances over the weekend. And you know the deal because we've seen it all season long. Like, we've had these amazing moments of victory. Like, I think of like Colorado and Baylor. Like, that just jumps into my mind, right? And then you have like these crushing defeats. I think of Cal and Miami. Like, by the way, it was targeting, right? I think of the grittiness, guys like Carson Swessinger, like, what an absolute stud. Leads the nation in tackles from a power four standpoint. He's third in the nation overall, 136 on the season from a former walk-on. And you just see all these people that are driven. They're driven by the passion for the game. They're true go-getters who pump a ton of passion into every play. That is why we partner with 76 all season long. They're such a proud partner of ours. We've created the Go, Go, Go Awards. And now we have some repeat winners that just continue to go, 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 whether it's coaches, whether it's players, whether it's fans. Like, we dive into everything. So, Jim, who are our final regular season award winners in our last week? And yes, we will have postseason awards.
Yeah, and like you said, there are some familiar faces here. And the 5-star QB goes to Shedeur Sanders on his senior day, which was a cool movement. Went over 400 yards passing, had 5 passing touchdowns, broke his own single season passing yards record that he had set the previous season. I'd been very critical of Colorado last year. I thought it was more stat heavy than more sizzle than performance. This year they have lived up. They brought as much performance as they have sizzle, and it'll be interesting to see where this program continues to rise from this historic season for them. And on that note, that dude, his teammate Travis Hunter, I think sometimes maybe Travis even gets a little bit too much buzz going on for everything, but this was one where it was 100% a warranted buzz. 3 receiving touchdowns and an interception in the same game. He's the first college football player to do that since at least 1996. That's as far as back as people have those kind of databases of that so far. I mean, he had 10 catches, over 100 yards receiving. I mean, he literally did everything in that game. And between him and Shedeur, I mean, they just literally embarrassed an Oklahoma State team that has had just a really, really brutal season. The guy that right now, as far as the odds makers that Travis is in the hunt with for the Heisman, Ashton Genty is now a 6-time winner of our Go Go Gone award. He had another 200-yard game, another 60-yard run. He now has the 5th highest season rushing yards in a season in college football history. It's a pretty epic matchup between the two of them. I might have a personal preference right now, but I 100% see the arguments for both of them. And I think, you got your Heisman ballot in the mail today. So I think hopefully everyone will at least wait until after the Mountain West championship to see how Ashton does in that game, to kind of have one last data point to compare, since Colorado, their regular season is now done and they'll be waiting to see where they're going in the bowl game. And then lastly, the headset hero goes to Dan Lanning. I mean, first of all, this is not for the entire season, this particular award, because they went 12-0. But, I mean, they lost to Washington twice last year. And this year they really got them back. I mean, they won this game by 28 points and did it on both sides. I mean, they had 10 sacks, 16 tackles for loss. But then on the other side, they matched their season high with 49 points. So really a complete performance by the Ducks in a game that I know he probably won't say it, but I'm sure had to feel pretty sweet for Dan Lanning to kind of finally get over that Washington hump, as you were.
Yeah, it was impressive. All four of those, and it's been a fun award, I think, for us. Like we're texting Saturday and the Sunday, who should it be, who shouldn't it be? And there's so many talented performances. Cam Scatterbo, I keep thinking about him because I do think he'll garner some Heisman votes. We will be loud and proud about this to every Heisman voter. We'll be all over Y Option Social and mine. Don't vote yet. Watch this running back at Boise State on Friday night. Watch the Big Ten championship game with Dylan Gabriel. Like, watch the games. Watch the games. I hate Heisman moments, Jim. I hate it because I look at Dylan Gabriel and he's had a Heisman season. He really has. He really has, man. I mean, give him a moment, and it's the fourth down play coming out of the third quarter. His jump around is blaring at Camp Randall of Wisconsin, and he just delivers a dart. Like, just take a beat is what I might recommend in that regard. But congratulations to all of them. It's an award we take really seriously, as well as our partners at 76 do as well. Okay, so let's talk about chaos on the field. Okay, we referenced it off the field, but let's talk about on the field. Arizona, your school, disappointing season. Big 12, you reference Oklahoma State, nowhere near preseason expectations. Utah, nowhere near our expectations, everybody's expectations, most importantly, their expectations. What is the latest as we record this around midday on a Monday?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at just that Arizona State game, as an alum, that was a really tough watch. Kudos to Cam Scatterbo and Kenny Dillingham. If not for Travis Hunter and Dan Lanning, they would have been weekly winners again this week, I would think. It was fun in the sense with the Big 12 because you had those four teams that were all tied at the top and waiting to see how those tiebreakers all came together. So Arizona State, Iowa State, both wind up getting through because it had to go down to BYU Houston at the end of the night.
Late.
Now, BYU already knew at this point that they were out, but they still won, which then eliminated Colorado from the whole thing. So that, the chaos was definitely on the field there. But then when you look to your point, when you say with off the field, with Arizona, so Brent Rennan is coming back for another season. I know that will get some mixed reaction in Tucson. I think there's definitely a vocal portion of the fan base that was looking for a change there. Now, there's going to be changes in the staff. We'll get into that more later down the line. But I think it's they definitely need to make some changes based on how this season all mixed out. I think I'm excited or interested and hopefully excited to see what Brent does to reshape this staff to make them more competitive next season. So I think it's going to be a really interesting. I mean, and I imagine, I know Dino Babers, I've seen that he's not going to return. So who that offensive coordinator is going to be next year is going to be very interesting. And then with now, signing the early signing period happening at the back half of this week, and then next week, the portal, like who's coming, who's staying, all the rest of that stuff. This Arizona team will look very different next year, I think.
Ready, set. Use French fries to go. Yeah, oil from French fries. Turn yesterday's leftovers into today's fuel. More power, lower emissions. 76 renewable diesel fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
Okay, so let me just be hard and be straight up. This is always going to be through the lens of the West Coast. It's always going to be thoughtful. And I also think it has to be factual. Okay, so here's my thoughts on Arizona. Of course, Brent Brennan is returning. If they made a move, I think it would be short-sighted dramatically. And here's why. When he took over, let's just be realistic about it. He took over a very healthy situation. What Jed Fish did was nothing short of phenomenal. Positioned Arizona to be a CFP contender, a darling in college football. College football playoff expanding. Look at T-Mac and Noah and Big Jonah and all the talent coming back and wanting to stay to play for Brent Brennan. We all remember the halftime of the basketball game, and the school is on fire, right? It's peaking. NIL dollars are coming through. I get all that. It's all true. In addition, there is a version in college football now when you take over a healthy program, which rarely happens, right? It rarely happens. Usually taking over a disaster, right? That's why coaches get fired. Purdue fired their head coach. West Virginia fired their head coach. North Carolina, maybe not disaster, but they fired their head coach. Point being, it's usually like an issue. Now, because of what you referenced with the portal, I believe that Brent Brennan, when he went in and took that job, he had to stabilize it. Like the only goal was to kind of keep players. And you got to navigate that. And I'm telling you, I am on the phone. If I'm not talking to you or my wife, I'm talking to a parent, a coach, or a player who's thinking about going to the portal. I promise you that has been my last 2.5 weeks and definitely been my last 48 hours, okay? With that said, I think, my opinion, nobody else's, Brent Brennan walked into Arizona with all these players, all these expectations, ton of mojo, ton of juice in a new league that we would call nowhere near the talent that the Pac-12 had, at least at the top, from a year ago, and they got a shot to go win it. But he's got to navigate all of those things to keep a team intact. Does it? That's a win. Next thing, when you start playing, what do you got to do? Well, you want to keep the scheme intact. So you're bridging your vernacular, their vernacular. Jed Fish's offense, Dino Babers' offense. Then you learn really quick that, hey, this offense isn't necessarily working. So you make a change. How about some props for making the change? Right? Dino Babers is as accomplished as the top third of college football head coaches in the last 20 years. He was at Syracuse for 8-9 years, had won there, had done well there, was at Baylor when they were rolling. Like he coached me back in the day at Pitt. It's not like he didn't know what he was doing, right? So Brent had to make a really hard decision. Did that, okay? Then you look at their reality among that roster. That team is not the competitive depth type of team like Oregon, like Ohio State, like Penn State. They don't have the depth. Well, they lose 3 defensive players for the season, all team captains. Some of those players that are high profile coming back, they didn't play great. Players are going to enter the portal. Like nobody was thriving, right? Like to me, you could call that scheme. You could call that weight training. You call it a lot of things. I call it when I look at the tape, like didn't look great, right? So I don't think performance at a lot of positions matched expectations, maybe previous performance, maybe overextended hype. I say all that of like year one in college football now, when you take over something healthy, is way more challenging than people are giving it credit for. Same thing in Alabama. It's way more challenging because you have to kind of walk on eggshells, in my opinion. You got to walk on eggshells a little bit. You got to navigate all these little things. There's no like my way or the highway. It's like, hey, it's a little your way. It's a little my way. Here's some cash. Be a part of this thing versus what it used to be. So now year 2 for Brent Brennan, to me, this is like a year 1 because you're not getting there late. Remember, he got hired dramatically late in the cycle. Now this is what I want to go do, okay? Clearly, there was a change on offense. We all knew that was going to happen. You knew that was going to happen in September by the end of the season. So no shocker, zero breaking news in that regard. What other changes? We'll find out. We'll find out as they come. But I hope for Brent Brennan, and I believe, because I believe his AD made a statement, like she fully supports Brent. And the quote was something on the lines, help me out, Jim, of like, he needs the opportunity to do it his way. Basically what she was saying, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So let's give him that. Let's give him that. So the people that are covering this team, supporting this team, do it. Support him. Give him a shot. You know he can win. You know he can build a culture. He did it. He did the unthinkable at San Jose State with no money, right? And I get it. It's not the Big 12. They were also in the bottom of the Mountain West. Okay, so I just think that like it is imperative to not create something out of nothing. I've seen year 1 coaches get fired when those coaches got the job and seemingly had never been on the job before. Mississippi State rings true from a year ago, right? That's not the case here, folks. That's not the case. So we're going to be thoughtful, but I also think you got to call things out when you see him. And I think a lot of the dialogue around, is he going to come back? What the hell are we talking about? Like, it's a different environment when you walk in and you take a head job today than ever before in year 1. Yes, you might hit lightning a bottle and get Caleb Williams and go 11-2. Yes. But you also might really struggle with the situation, the environment that you're in. And I think that was the case. They underperformed. Nobody's saying that. I'm not giving them excuses. But I'm saying in year 2, let's let this coach and Brent Brennan do it in the exact way he wanted to. So the players that don't want to be there anymore, that are leveraging the portal, like, go ahead. If you don't want to be there, don't be there. And I think that's going to be a good thing. I'm not saying they're going to win the Big 12 next year. They'll be better than where they sit now. And they have, you could argue, next year, he and Avery Johnson, Noah Fafita and Avery Johnson, are still the 2 best quarterbacks in the Big 12 now that Shadour's gone. So there's my juice for today.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is like you to that point about competitive depth. Like I think it can be misleading when you have a generational talent like T-Mac at wide receiver, and you'd be like, "Oh, we have the best wide receiver in the country. We should be a good team." Like there are 20, 11 guys on the field at a time. Like, and you need all of that to work. It just can't be about him. Obviously, Noah is a highly successful quarterback. Big Jonah was a great offensive lineman 2 years ago. Seemed like he was banged up quite a bit this year. To your point on the defensive side, a lot of things. I think the amount of talent that they lost to either Washington that went with Jed and the staff up there, or a few guys left for the pros. They just, especially because of when Brent came in, it was harder to backfill those pieces. Yeah. Now, again, to your point, that's not an excuse. It's just reality. And he's going to have this off season to fix that. And he's going to have to, because I think the leash is probably going to be pretty short with that whole thing. Like he's going to need to show some success for next year.
Agreed. And I think I saw a tweet from Michael Lev, which is just, and it was good because we like Michael. And I think he's really thoughtful. I've known him for 20 years since he was covering SC. And it was like, let's not forget that Brent is really good at the craft. I think he's a hell of a coach. I think he's as good as, and we've said it, we've had him on the show, as good at building culture as anybody I've been around. And I think I've been around some pretty good ones. Like, let's not take that for granted, or let's not gloss over that. And I'm speaking to the fan base right now. I really believe that. So go support the daylights out of it. He's going to make the right move. And the worst thing to do now is talk about like how the leash is so tight, because then why do you want to go coach there? Like I'm telling you, like I'm going to take it up to the edge of my insight and knowledge and conversations I've had with other coaches around the country that I think could be a great fit at this school as an offensive coordinator. So show the support. Show the support for your team, because why not? Well, the players deserve it. All right, let's move on.
I was going to say, let's zoom out then to kind of get the whole thing here, because it's obviously not something that's just happening at Arizona right now. That's right. We have this whole, like I said, this whole back half of the week will be the early signing period. Next week will be the portal. We know that Utah will be hiring an offensive coordinator as well. I mean, by the time this podcast comes out, that might already be done.
I'm checking right now to see if anybody's announced anything.
We're still waiting to know. Kyle Whittingham said he was going to say what his future is at some point during the offseason. We've seen, Purdue fire Ryan Walters, West Virginia fire Neil Brown, North Carolina fire Mac Brown. So there's been, Gus Malzahn leaving UCF, pulling the Chip Kelly move, and now he's going to go be the Florida State offensive coordinator. So there are openings, and without getting specific, because this could get dated very quickly without getting super specific, just what is your take on, just how wild of a ride is this going to be the next week and a half, 2 weeks, the month of December, with all of these different factors coming through?
It's a race right now. And this is the jacked up part of the sport right now. I think and look, I'm not saying anything nobody knows. And I'll say this as an analogy. The football season is so good, Jim. And I said it last year, and I'm going to say it again. The minute the regular season ends, the cloud comes over the sport. And the cloud is over the sport. And to me, we wrote about it at yoption.com over the weekend. I think there's quarterbacks or other players that are considering the portal or knew they were going to enter the portal that didn't play their best game, their most focused games over the weekend. I'm not going to get into any specifics. But I know for a fact that a head coach of a Power 4 school called a quarterback on the West Coast a month ago. It's just a reality, folks. So this is where we sit. So what's going to happen, Jim? It's going to be a race to hire coordinators. That's the first thing. I don't think there's going to be a race to hire the head coach before Wednesday. I'm talking to players that are committed to a lot of these schools later today on a Monday before Wednesday happens. And I wouldn't recommend an AD to try to make a hire before Wednesday unless you knew exactly who you're going to hire. Like, you have to go through this process, right? I would imagine at West Virginia, at Purdue, at North Carolina. Like they had an idea what they were going to do, right? More firings were coming through. So I'd imagine they're interviewing a bunch of people today, tomorrow, and we'll try to make a decision. The thing that is going to get accelerated and is accelerated is teams that currently have head coaches and are hiring coordinators, because you are trying to set the market for the quarterback position, whether that is Utah, whether that is, help me out, Washington State just let go of their defensive coordinator, right? Ben
Correct,
Arbuckle,
yeah.
to me, is going to land somewhere else other than Washington State. Rumored to be at Oklahoma a week and a half ago, rumored to be in the conversation at Utah. He'll thrive wherever he goes. So to me, that's the move. Because then the next move is, and I hate this, it's, well, who's coming with you? Just being honest with you, right? Like that's just what the reality and the expectation to a degree is. So that's it. That's the race. The race is, who can I hire my coordinator now, and then who's going to come with him as a player, and or who's going to come with him as a staff. That is exact. I've been on the phone nonstop. My wife could probably tell you more insider scoop than anybody. I don't like being a breaking news guy. I never will be. That's why Pete Thamel and Bruce Feldman are amazing at what they do. We don't have to do that here. But that's what it is. Period. End of story. Most important element. And then I think it's probably in real time deciding and or negotiating with your current roster. Saw Miller Moss enter the portal on Monday. What's Utah going to do with Cam Rising? I'm sure there's conversations around that. And so what's going to happen with a lot of these starting quarterbacks, right? There's a lot of rumors about starting quarterbacks being targeted by other schools. Their parents are talking to other schools. Their agents are talking to other schools. Maybe they're talking to other schools. It's so screwed up, man. Because where I empathize, and we always will here, it's why we wrote the book 5-Star QB, is that there is no way to Google how to navigate being tampered with, how to navigate making life-changing money while I'm currently at another school. And what I'm hearing is a lot of the current players that are deciding, do they want to go, do they want to stay, they're being told to tell the staff, this is what I need to stay. Not another $250,000, another $500,000. Sure, that's already part of it, folks. Get past that. But it's, do we need to make a change schematically? Do we need to make a change coaching-wise? And let me be really clear on that. That pisses me off, because I'll say this as a coach, as a former coach. I walked in, and I'm going to come across probably like a little bit of a jerk right now, Jim, and I'll try my best not to. But when I played in college, I would love to think that my teammates would say I was one of the sharper guys on the team. I knew the offense inside and out. I think Larry Fitzgerald will tell you I taught him the offense. I knew that stuff. I walked into USC as a 22-year-old young assistant on that staff thinking, I know football. My first meeting, they might as well have been speaking multiple different languages while doing arithmetic. Like it was John Nash, if you remember the movie The Beautiful Mind. And I'm in there being like, what are they talking about? So when I hear that parents and agents, God forbid players, are asking coaches for demands for them to stay, I'm saying, hey, buddy, like, you study, you prepare, you're probably in the facility all the time, but you don't know squat compared to the people that have dedicated 10, 15, 20, 25 years of their lives to the craft. You know stuff. I'm not taking that away from you. And I love the position. But that to me is out of bounds. Yeah, hey, I want to be protected. What are we going to do in the offensive line? Can you get me a dominant extra receiver? I get, of course. Yeah, of course. That's part of how are we going to be better? But some of the things I'm being told from people that represent players, and that's a big, big word, represent. Could be family members who love their kids. If my sons were in major college football, I'm sure I wouldn't do it perfectly. So I'm giving grace. I'm having empathy for everybody involved. Like, there's no way to go your way through this. But the demand thing, that pisses me off, man. That is not the way this thing works. It's just not the way that it works. It's not reality. And I hate that for where the sport sits with the cloud that's over it. I just do. So.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think as a way to kind of segue out of this, I mean, we've seen that Ryan Day now is getting kind of the vote of confidence per se from the AD. Are our interview coming up here is going to be very interesting on said topic. So I think it's just where we're at with this sport right now.
Yeah. And yeah. And I got no problem being emotional about it, because I think that I think the sport's at a beautiful time. I think the interest in the regular season was phenomenal. I think that the opportunity for the postseason is only great for the game. I love that players get paid, but the transient nature that happens because there's no discipline around a calendar can change. They can change. Start the season earlier if you're worried about the semesters and the academic side of it. Cut out the second bye week. Like, have, God forbid, one less game, 2 less games. We had the commissioner of the Big Sky Conference on last week, right? They're in the playoffs right now. Like, there's answers. And I'll go back to our friend Mac Brown. He came on this show probably 6 years ago. He was still on TV. And he said, Yogi, college football is about the players and the fans. And now it's about the media and the money. And now it's about even more than that, right? It's about the negotiation and the fit and the transient nature of it. And once we get to the season again, it'll be great. But this right now is it's a time that's beautiful for some, the haves, and it's really challenging for the have-nots. And I feel for the player amid it all, because you're either going through it for the first time, you're being leveraged for the first time, you're trying to navigate it for the first time, and all you want to do is play in a healthy environment. And sometimes healthy means dealing with adversity. So that's where I'm at. So it'll be a big newsy week. I'm going to head up to Oregon. I can't wait. I'm going to sit down with Dan Lanning. I'm going to sit down with Dylan Gabriel, be around the program, be around practice. Like, we'll come with an interview later this week with Rhett Lewis to really break down the game. But in advance of that, we bring in our good friend from Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises. This guy has really the Midwest, the Big Ten on lockdown. He's expanded his footprint to cover teams in the Big Ten like Oregon. It's really cool. Look back at Michigan, Ohio State. Look at Penn State and Oregon, and just hearing his perspective on what 4 new teams the Big Ten has done to his footprint and his lens on college football. So, Jim, thank you for letting me get my verbal workout in today. There's a lot there. Thank you all for listening to us. For those in Tucson, I hope you take a listen, and you have opinions, let us know. And those all over the country. We got a big offseason because it's not the offseason. We got championship game this weekend. We're going to Indy. We're going to the Heisman the week after that, and then we'll see where the CFP takes us. But, Jim, I love you, man. Let's get to our interview presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go from the Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises. As mentioned, Doug Lesmerises, Kings of the North. I love the tagline, join the North because the South can cram it. So the North meets the West. I've been on your show before, Doug, here at Y Option. Now we get to unite. I know we'll unite this weekend in Indianapolis in person. Last time we were in person, we were in Indianapolis for media days, but here we sit. Did you take a big exhale like we did here at Y Option? We made it. We made it through round 1, I guess you should say, of college football.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has been an absolutely unbelievable regular season. The double bye, right, gives everybody 2 weeks off, but also makes it a 14-week regular season. But there have been so many games that have mattered, right? And it's what I think we thought the 12-team playoff would bring to college football. But just for instance, watching how, Ohio State, Michigan was a huge game, but how much that mattered to Penn State to get them in the Big Ten championship game. And then all the stuff in the Big 12 to have 4 games on the weekend that mattered for the Big 12 and who's going to get in that championship game, and have Texas A&M and Syracuse knocking Miami out of the ACC title game. It is, and I just think it's one of those, Yogi, right, where everybody cares a little bit more about all that stuff because everybody affects everybody much more. So for an Oregon fan, you could say, what do I care about Syracuse, Miami? But actually, if Miami gets in the playoff, if they beat Syracuse and get to the ACC title game, Miami might see Oregon in a quarterfinal. So that could really matter. So I think it just was, I love the connection of the sport, and I love the opportunity, and I thought the regular season delivered, brother.
Amen. I think the postseason will as well. We're hoping out west that it's like Kenny Dillingham meets Dan Lanning somewhere along the line. Just why not? Why not? It's crazy with SMU and all the things that you just kind of referenced in terms of where the sport was a year ago, where it sits now. Before we get to the now in this week, I do want to talk about, because as you know, my first year worked for the Big Ten Network. It's been a blast. We had some Big Ten games this weekend, and I love to hear it from your lens, where you reside. You reside near kind of the epicenter of football a week ago, right? That game, Michigan, Ohio State. I watched that game back 3 times, and I came away with it every time being like, it was fun, it was competitive, it was heightened, it was tense. But like, it wasn't clean. Like, it wasn't great football by any stretch, at least for me. And then they had the melee at the end. Like, I'm just kind of curious your takeaway from, you've been to a bunch of these, you've covered these for a long time. You're well regarded, obviously, in all those communities. Like, educate us on the West Coast, your takeaways from the game.
Yeah, I did think that's a good point you made. Like, I thought when I came away from Ohio State, Oregon, I thought that was a high level game. That was 2 teams that I thought made plays, right? And it comes down to Will Howard trying to get down a second late, and the things that Oregon like went over the top. And then Ohio State, Michigan it wasn't that same kind of feel. The thing that I think has happened to Ohio State is they wind up playing that game on Michigan's terms. And they always show the graphic. It's, I think, 23 straight years now that the team that wins the rushing battle wins the Ohio State-Michigan game, except Michigan is built to run and Ohio State's built to throw. So then does that mean when you get to that game as Ohio State, should you try to say, okay, well, I mean, it's 23 straight years. You got to win the rushing battle to win this game. Or should you try to do it on your terms? Now, they did throw it a good amount. They threw it basically as more than they did all year, but throw it even more. Ohio State's advantages in that game. Will Johnson's not playing for Michigan. Give Jeremiah Smith 15 targets. And somehow when it mattered, Michigan was absent 2 of its 3 best players, in Will Johnson and Colston Loveland. But Ohio State let Mason Graham win huge moments because Ohio State, their weakest part of the team is the interior of the offensive line. It's like, I don't know, you got a 3rd down run here. What do you want to do? Maybe run at Mason Graham? It's like, no, don't run at Mason Graham. What are you doing? So to miss 2 field goals for Ohio State, that's huge. To throw an interception that sets up a Michigan touchdown and throw another interception in the red zone, that's huge. But the talent disparity, this is why it was so different to me. I look back, Yogi, since 1951, when Woody Hayes took over at Ohio State, when both Ohio State and Michigan are in the top 10, it's basically a 50-50 game. When neither team is ranked, it's basically a 50-50 game. But since 1951, when Ohio State was in the top 10 and Michigan was not, Ohio State was 18-4 in the game. Yeah, and that was the circumstance this year. So sometimes people say, throw out the record. It's a rivalry game. I'm like, don't throw out the records. The records show you when they're both good, it's even. When they're both not so good, it's even. But when Ohio State's really good and Michigan's not, Ohio State wins 90% of the time. That's what I thought this game was going to be. So when it's not that, it's changed my opinion of things, because otherwise the last 3 Michigan wins, that's 2 great teams. Someone's got to win, someone's got to lose. This is obviously a Michigan team with a huge hole offensively that still found a way to win. So huge credit to Sharon Moore, but what a failure by Ohio State.
Interesting. Like, I look at rivalry games and I always say, when it's, to your point, the disparagement, at least the record-wise or ranking-wise this year, for the team not ranked, you got to survive the first quarter. Like, you just got to survive the onslaught, and then anything can happen at the end of a game. And I think it's all about belief as a game goes on. When I watched this one, it felt tight, and I get big games do. And look, I come at it from a different lens than where you sit. That's why I love this conversation. I know it is the biggest thing going. Team up north, we don't reference them. We think about it when we go to bed. We think about them when we wake up. Like, I get rivalries in that regard. But I also come from the school of Pete Carroll, which has really trained me in the following ways. Year 1 at SC, we played Notre Dame, and we made it the biggest deal in the history of the world. We wrote about it in the Y Option newsletter this weekend, and it would visit the Grotto and college football, like all the things. And the team didn't play well, and it was just a big deal. So my thing coming into this year, first year of the Big Ten Network, and I'm a huge, by the way, I'm a huge Ryan Day fan. Huge Chip Kelly fan. You might not find anybody who loves Chip Kelly more than I do, okay? As a human, as a coach, the whole 9 yards. I know him extremely well. To that point, I look at this Ohio State team, and maybe this game, and this is what it is, but I felt like there was just, it was such a different deal than any other game. And I get the history and all that, but within your walls, and that's what we did at SC, it was like every fan in LA thinks USC Notre Dame's a bigger rivalry than USC UCLA. Every player is like, nah, it's UCLA, man. Like that's the emotional week.
Okay.
Notre Dame is like just hit for history. So when I say that is as I continue to watch it, I watched the TV copy, I watched the game copy twice, just the coach's copy. It felt tight.
Yeah.
It felt like it was a bigger deal. Like just watching the expression and everybody's a reflection of the head coach, everybody's a reflection of the leaders on the team. They all come back for this game. To me, I just felt like this team played like every snap meant the game versus every snap meant the snap. And you and one of your colleagues was there. So I want to hear about that. And then also tell me about the wind, because everybody's criticizing they don't throw it. And I heard from both staffs how windy it was. So what was it like out there in that regard?
Yeah. I mean, it right. When people are always wondering, it's like, oh, it might snow. It's super cold. It's like all that stuff. The wind is what matters, right? The wind is what really does affect that. But Ohio State was like trying field goals in the wind. It didn't make them go for it on fourth down. So I do, there have been games in my career covering Ohio State where it's absolutely balls going sideways. Like you almost can't throw the ball. I don't think it was that to that extent, but I still think you have to emphasize the matchups that allow you to have the greatest advantage. And I do think you've still got to find a way to get the ball even more to Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith. But the mental side of it, I thought there was such a disparity in the talent that the mental side wouldn't matter as much in this one, right? I do think when the talent's equal in a rivalry game, then it really is about emotion and that mental toughness and handling the rivalry. But that Ohio State allowed that to be the case, right? Just go play ball. Just go do your thing. But I do think, Yogi, it's one of those where Ohio State brought back so many guys who could have gone to the NFL. That's been the story of their whole season. But they also brought back guys who had never beaten Michigan. So that was a living thing for them. There's going to be such roster turnover now. I think it almost might be good for this Ohio State program to kind of wipe out the guys. Ryan Day talks about scars a lot in this rivalry. They're scarred up, man. They're covered in scars. So there's guys who are going to play next year for Ohio State who have been part of it, but haven't been a big part of it. And I think they need a refresh. Now, and I think you could talk about whether they need a refresh at head coach too. But I think that it was too much for them. It's too much for them. Because again, the last 3 years, I'm like, listen, man, Aiden Hutchinson, I don't know what you're going to do. JJ McCarthy ripping throws on third down. Like there's real football stuff here. This was not the football stuff. Ohio State should have been able to do what it needed to do. And instead, Michigan dictated on its terms. And then it's one of those, again, why does Michigan have a great kicker from the portal and Ohio State has a kicker that can't be reliable in that game? There's a little bit of roster building on the edges that makes you question some stuff. So I thought I think for a lot of people, and I talked to a lot of Ohio State fans, for a lot of Ohio State fans, this was the line in the sand. And it's in the new world, Yogi, it really is a heart and head conversation. For the heart of Ohio State fans, the game has not been diminished. There are people who are sick. There are people who can't function. Ohio State fans can't function right now. Nobody is saying, well, we're still in the playoff, because it's your heart first. And then maybe in a couple days, I don't know how much this has to say about whether Ohio State can win the national title or not, because I think they might specifically have a Michigan problem. And now you get in the national title picture in the playoff. I don't know. Take your shot. But there are hearts broken in Columbus right now. So the fact that Ohio State's still in the playoff is not making anybody, from an Ohio State perspective, much happier about this.
Okay, one more on this, then we'll move on.
Yeah.
I hear you, fans. Your hearts are broken. But I also watch the players post-game. Yeah. And I don't care, like, the players are getting, and I get it, players are getting paid. It should be a totally different conversation, a $20 million alleged roster, et cetera, for Ohio State. But when I watch those two individuals apologize to fans, and you could feel the weight of it on them.
Yes.
I hope, and I know you do this with Kings of the North, the foundation of Y Option is thoughtful dialogue. Like, and I know that's a crazy phrase, like a couple days after the heartbreaking loss to your rival that you haven't beaten in years. But God, just like stay out of players' DMs. Like, let these guys just operate to a degree. You said something that stood out to me though. You said, like, I think your quote was something along the lines of, like, Ryan Day, like, should he come back? Should he be that guy? I just saw their AD come out and say, like, of course I have his back. Look at the job he's done. What is he? 66-10 in his time there at Ohio State. For me on the West Coast, I think it's absurd to think about Ryan Day being let go. I could see him being like, do I want to be here? I understand that. Bruce Feldman wrote a great piece about that earlier this weekend. But where do you net on that? Like, is that a thing? Like, I know the John Cooper thing and away we go, but like, what's reality for you, somebody living in that region around the head coach of Ohio State?
I think this loss makes it a reality. I was where you were before. Like, what are we doing? Like, are you serious? We're going to have this conversation that like they've won so much. And then they lost to Michigan last year on the last drive of the game, and Michigan went undefeated and won the national title. Like, somehow that's like so unacceptable that you have to get a new coach. That seemed crazy to me. This was a Cooper loss. So when I said 18-4 going into this year, when Ohio State was ranked in the top 10 and Michigan was not, it was 1969, which was Bo Schembechler's first year, and 3 John Cooper losses in the mid-90s. So now you have an actual Cooper loss. How could you lose this game? And I think there are things that you could look at and say, I now question whether Ryan Day can get over the top in this game. And my whole thing, Yogi, in this modern world for Ohio State is there are 2 paths, and they don't really intersect, but they're equally important. One is the beat Michigan path, and one is the compete for a national title path. The compete for a national title path is still wide open. The Michigan loss doesn't affect that. But the Michigan path is on fire now. The Michigan path is a failure. So I think you have to be really good on the compete for the national title path, because they haven't reached any of their goals for 4 years. They haven't been to a Big Ten title game. They haven't beat Michigan. They haven't won a national title. So go take your shot. But if you have lost 4 straight to Michigan and this team came back, you added Will Howard, you added Caleb Downs, you added Quinshon Judkins, and you weren't that competitive for a national title, if you lose, if you kind of get blown out in the semis or you lose in the quarters, then it's like, well, where's the success? Where's the path of success? You're 0 for 2. If you win a national title, you're not going to fire a national title head coach. But this is really like, I didn't like the natty or bust stuff before the season for Ohio State. I just think it's crazy. But now I think it might be natty or bust for whether Ryan Day is back. I really do, because what are you hanging on to? And the pressure, if you don't have a national title, the pressure of now we're doing this all again for 365 days. Can you beat Michigan? It might be untenable. But also, I think we now have real questions about, can this guy win this game? When I didn't have those questions before. They're just losing to good Michigan teams. Sometimes you lose to a good team. This really kind of changed my mind.
Wow, interesting. Okay, well, a lot to unpack there. I think this on the playoff for Ohio State, like obviously they won't get a bye. From the beginning of this expanded playoff, which is great,
Yep.
I feel like it's going to be so hard for anybody to go win consecutive games against elite teams. Like, there's just so many layers of that. Like,
Oh, yeah.
You can't go out in free agency midseason and get a center or get a left tackle. Like, and that's just the difference between that and the NFL. So
Yep.
It's going to be fascinating to follow. Obviously, everybody's going to be locked into you at Kings of the North. Make sure you check out everything Doug and his team are doing. Okay, so let's talk about the championship game.
Sure.
Oregon is the only team that I've seen all season in college football that I can count on, honestly.
Yes.
And it's not just because they have a 0 in terms of unblemished, but like, I know who they are at every phase. Like, I don't have a lot of questions about their O-line, their D-line, their receivers, their coaching staff. Like, I feel, and I've been around this team for over 20 years, so that makes sense, but maybe from my lens. For you, do you agree with that? And then what do you think about their opponent? Because their opponent has finally kind of, they'd be Ohio State in the past, right? They're the team that couldn't get over that hump, couldn't beat one of those 2 teams in Michigan and Ohio State, and couldn't get to the playoff. And now, like, they're in the playoff lock.
Yep.
And they might have a number 1 seed instead of hosting a game in Happy Valley.
Yeah. So I agree on Oregon, and I do. We've been reminding ourselves, and it's why we were so grateful that you came on our show, Yogi. Like, we just wanted to make sure that we talked about Oregon enough because they were just doing their thing. And I kind of compared it to, sometimes you have like a 5-star recruit who commits 18 months early and just is locked into the program, and you kind of forget about him, while the guys who are going down to the wire with signing day coming up get a lot of attention. It's like, hey, by the way, there's a 5-star over here. Don't forget about him. Don't forget about Oregon. And we were also reminding ourselves, hey, if there was anything that you thought, man, do they kind of not, losing Tez Johnson for the time they did is gigantic. That guy is so important to what they do, and that Jordan Birch has been in and out of the lineup. And we're so focused, like Ohio State has these offensive line injuries. Well, so does Oregon. And to lose that, like, I just thought that the Wisconsin game is completely explainable by 8 straight weeks. Camp Randall is nuts, and they did find a way. But that was other than the Boise State game, which to me was a Heisman candidate on the other team, and B, like their offensive line wasn't figured out then. Handling business. And so, like, I don't, is it possible? You can't sneak up on somebody as the only undefeated team in FBS and as the number 1 seed. But if you could, I feel like Oregon might be doing it, Yogi, because they've just been doing their thing. And it's not, we haven't forgotten about them. But I don't know that, like, Oregon's the team that Georgia and Texas and Tennessee are thinking about necessarily, when it absolutely should be the team that they are thinking about, because they're the most complete team on both sides of the ball. They steal possessions, they win on the margins, and they're explosive, and they have a veteran quarterback, and they have playmakers on defense. I mean, they have to be the favorite going into this. And in a year of ups and downs, when teams are losing to Kentucky and Arkansas and stuff like that, to not do that is even more impressive.
Okay, so let's talk about their opponent. I do want your thoughts because you got to help out our audience. I watched the end of the game against Maryland, Penn State. It's 4th and 12 with 4 seconds to go, and they throw the ball for a touchdown.
Yep.
What do I need? What am I missing about for these two head coaches who used to be assistants at Maryland together?
Yeah.
And then what do you think about just the team and the resurgence they've had since they lost to Ohio State at home?
So been super impressed, because often what has happened with Penn State in the past is they lose to Ohio State and it sets them off on a wrong path. Instead, they have responded. Now, it was a little bit of a weaker schedule, but they've asserted themselves. And so I'm impressed by that. The end of the game, I believe in keeping the pedal down, and I think that James Franklin is trying to make sure his team is confident, because I've been saying all year since this started, I thought the 12-team playoff was built for Penn State. I thought they were the number 1 example of a team that could thrive in this environment, because you no longer have to go through Ohio State. You can just do your own thing and have a chance anyway, and this shows it. Andy Kotelnicki has been a godsend for them as an offensive coordinator. James Franklin wanted to be more explosive. That was their priority in the offseason with that hire. It has happened perfectly. What Ty Warren is doing, I think Ty Warren has a chance to get to New York. I think we have 2 Heisman locks for New York. Travis Hunter's going to win. Ashton Genty's going to get there. Cam Ward and Will Howard were in that race. They're not playing this weekend. I think Dylan Gabriel's going to New York. I think the 4th spot could be Ty Warren, the Penn State tight end, if he shows out against Oregon. But their creativity on offense, the 2 backs, Nick Singleton had a slump last year as a sophomore, has been great when he's been healthy as a junior. You throw in Katron Allen. They're not explosive on the outside, but they're so creative. They have their own offensive line injuries as well, but I think Andy Kotelnicki finds a way. And they were not creative in the Ohio State game. They got stoned at the goal line with some terrible play calls. I think they have learned from that. And James Franklin has a lot of stuff about he fails in big games. It's really against Ohio State and Michigan. It's in his house. It's in his neighborhood. So Oregon, that's out of his neighborhood. The playoff, that's out of his neighborhood. I'm not so sure that James Franklin has a big game problem. I think he has a Michigan and Ohio State problem. And he has a chance to go win some games against great teams who aren't those programs. I really like where Penn State's at. Their defense, I think, has gone from good to great over the course of the season. They added some SEC transfers at corner, and Abdul Carter's a problem. They like their linebackers. They've overcome a safety injury. I'm super excited for this game, Yogi, because I absolutely think Penn State can make some noise in the playoff.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I thought that Minnesota was the one that would get Penn State. I circled that as an upset.
That's the game they lose.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. And it was great, how they showed up, whether it was the fake punt, like just the little things that they did in that game, just really creative. Andy Kotelnicki, huge fan, got to spend some time with him in training camp. I love watching the rise from small school to big time.
Yes.
Same deal with Dan Lanning, same deal with Will Stein. You look at so many people that are having success in college football. Kurt Cignetti is clearly the poster human for that description. I'd add Cam Scatterbo to that list. So to everybody listening, and you're a voter, don't vote. You got your ballot on a Monday.
I know.
Of championship week. It should be changed.
Can you believe that? They send out hey, you can start. How could you cast a Heisman vote today?
I don't know. We've asked. It's a sensitive subject out west because Christian McCaffrey got completely screwed for the Heisman because there were 15% of Heisman voters that voted in advance of him going for 3-something in the
Yeah.
Pac-12 championship game that year against USC. I think your point on James Franklin is well noted. I've watched him beat Utah in person, watched him beat Washington in the Fiesta Bowl in person, like big games. I think this is a really fun matchup. The difference to me, and I'll say this. 2 big takeaways from Big Ten play, me being in the league for the first time. One is teams just lean on you, right? It could be 0-0 after the first quarter, like Ohio State and Purdue or Northwestern or whatever it was, and then it's 49-7. Like they just limited possessions, they lean on you. But 2 is it's been average QB play and just okay at the skill positions. Tyler Warren is a monster. Like right now, to me, he's in that consideration for top 3 Heisman vote as well. What do their receivers do? Like, there's going to be a world where Tosh Lupoy and company, they're going to do what everybody tries to do, which is they're going to try to take away Ty Warren, obviously. And I think they got linebackers that can run with him, and Devin Jackson, Bryce Betcher and company, Jeffrey Bossa. These guys are their former safeties now playing linebacker. They've got depth in the back end that I think can glove some of these wide receivers. So I'm excited to see how Penn State runs the ball. Drew Aller, how big is Bo Prabula in terms of the game plan and the packaging? Because both of these teams have a ton of window dressing, shifts, motion. I think they're top 2 in the Big Ten coming into this game in motion percentage. So it'll be fun. Michigan might be right in there, the top 3 as well. But overall, I love the matchup. So before we cut you loose, it's Monday. You got to pick. Like you can change it, but where do you net out?
Yeah, I mean, I would lean Oregon. It's really hard for me from this perspective. Again, having really locked in on that Ohio State-Oregon game when Evan Stewart was such a game changer in that game. But Evan Stewart's had like 4 awesome games and then kind of 8 games where he kind of hasn't done anything. But again, I give so much credit to Oregon for winning the way it has when they haven't always had Tez Johnson, when they haven't always had Jordan Burch. I do think there's great coaching in this game. But the lack of explosion on the outside still stands out for Penn State. And to your point, again, they got Jalen Kimber from Florida and A.J. Harris from Georgia as SEC transfer corners this year. They've got to go in the portal in the offseason and try to do the same thing at receiver. I just think Oregon probably is too well-rounded, but then also more explosive, whereas Penn State's going to be creative, but they have a hole that Oregon doesn't have. So I probably have Oregon by 10 or 14 in a competitive game. But I'm excited. I'm excited to get in there. And I just like it, right, Yogi? It's kind of fun to see 2 teams play at a high level that haven't played yet. So Oregon, Ohio State would have been cool. We've also seen that. We still may see it again in the playoff. I'm excited because we haven't seen Penn State, Oregon yet.
Yeah, I think what's unique about Oregon for your viewers, if they forget, last year they lost a tight game to Washington. Then they played them again in the championship game. And all the talk was on how Oregon was going to win that game. I think they were favored in that game. And everyone's like, what? Like, UW beat them. What are we talking about? And Washington comes out, and the first half, they just dominated. They ran the ball well. They did a lot of different things, and they win the game. I think that loss and that experience, especially for the guys on defense and the offensive line, like we know Dylan Gabriel wasn't there, but the majority of that team was there for that experience. There's a handful of guys that are new additions to this team that are impactful players. Most of the guys were there. I think that bodes extremely well for them in this game. And I just keep going. Like, I think coaches speak to the team through the media. And Dan Lanning's masterful in terms of what he says and how he says it. Job's not done. Like, they're just not satisfied.
Yes.
Like, season's not over. And we've been around him too much. I'm flying up right after this. We're like, they just stay operational. I love that. I really like that. James Franklin, very similarly, like we hear the whole 1-0 mindset, etc. So I think we'll get a classic game.
Yes.
I think what's been interesting for us out here is 4 new teams enter the Big Ten. Curious for you, I just referenced the things that I learned from my first year covering this league in depth. Well, how about you? Like, is there a surprising thing that impacted this league, or something maybe you didn't anticipate, or something you confirmed with 4 West Coast schools coming into the Midwest and East Coast?
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like the travel did matter.
Yeah.
Right. Like, when I do like that was, so I'll be very curious how much that dissipates over time. But I mean, you especially like Washington was 2 different teams, home and road. Right. And like, very understandable, but like, this is just the reality here. So I'm curious how that goes. And then just a fascination with what USC is going to do and what it is going to be. Because again, and we talked about this in the preseason, like, thank goodness for Dan Lanning in Oregon, because initially it was like, okay, here come UCLA and USC. Like, USC is going to be one of these programs that's going to help lift the league. And that's just not where USC is right now. But Oregon absolutely is there. And so, again, from this Midwestern perspective of this, like, Oregon is like awesome. It's not like, oh no, Oregon came to beat these teams. It's like, welcome. Like, let's go. Let's play great games. Ohio State, Oregon was an awesome game. And then you're one of us now. So, like, go kick some booty in the playoff, man. Like, go Ducks. So, like, when will USC enter that conversation? It's just, like, fascinating to watch from out here. But just, and I'm sure you know this, Yogi, the idea we could have 5 conference champs this season who were not in their league last year. Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
Arizona State, Texas, SMU, and Army in the American. That's how much the sport has changed. But welcome to the Ducks, our Northern Kings and our Western Kings, who are making everything in the Big Ten better. And I know how hard it was for everybody out there, but I just hope Oregon fans understand how fired up we are to have you. And, like, I'll tell you what, man, like, if we wind up in like a Oregon Texas national title game, we are rallying all the energy in the North for Go Ducks if we get there. But we also could get Ohio State looks like an 8-9. We could get Oregon, Ohio State in a quarter also, which would be crazy, but super fun. So let's go.
Yeah, I know the committee won't do it, but I hope they don't pit conference teams against conference teams. Like just do whatever you can if you can manipulate it, just in case.
Totally in favor of manipulation.
Yeah,
totally in favor
totally.
of that.
Why not? Why not? Why
make
not?
cool games. Make cool games.
I love it. Doug Lesmerises. He is the guru when it comes to everything Big Ten, Kings of the North. I love how you've expanded all your coverage with your team, man. It's a must follow on social. Love listening to you guys on the flights to games and coming home. And thank you for the time. I know how busy you are. Can't wait to see you.
Of course.
Give you a big hug this coming weekend. Jim Thornby and I will be there from Y Option. The West meets the North, and the Midwest and the South can whatever.
Ram it.
There we go, folks. Thanks, brother.
Thanks, Yogi.
It's the Afterglow. Yogi Roth, Jim Thornby. That was our good friend, Doug Lesmerises from Kings of the North. As always, presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. Jim, on my way to go on a plane to get to Eugene to learn more about the Ducks. What did you learn from Doug about how he views college football from the lens of the North?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously all the Oregon and SC stuff was, from our vantage point is very interesting. But from learning about his vantage point, the part that really stuck with me was the part with Ohio State, where you have the Michigan track and the national championship track. And if you're off on one, you can't be off on the other. And so that was, I mean, I get it. It is kind of crazy to think that Ryan Day's job can be in jeopardy, even though the AD is saying right now that that's not the case. Because I think that they still think that they have a very good chance, and they do have a very good chance to just win the whole thing. And so I know it's funny because I think some people have gotten into oh, well, that game didn't matter because Ohio State still has a chance to win the national championship game. That Ohio State Michigan game didn't matter. Right. And I think this conversation proved that definitely is not the case. I mean, I was more interested in games on Saturday, games I would have never, granted, not working for a particular conference anymore has broadened my ability to watch more stuff. But I was watching all sorts of crazy games I would have never watched before because I would have been way too locked in on, this Stanford game or this USC game or what have you. I was able to suck all that in because they all meant something. So I thought that was really fun about that conversation, and then about the weekend as a whole, about how much the playoffs have kind of changed that for me. I've gotten that from other people that it's not the case, but for me, it definitely is.
Yeah, and to the Stanford fans listening, we are efforting to get Andrew Luck on the pod because it was monumental in terms of the announcement. over the weekend, and we'll touch more upon that later on this week. With that said, I'm starting to think in my brain like about epic rivalries: Yankees, Red Sox, Duke, Carolina, Packers, Bears, right? Packers, Vikings. I don't know, like whatever you want it to be. I have a hard time thinking about a rivalry where coaches get fired because they can't beat their opponent. Like I really, I mean, like I can't think of one other than this game. Like you hear about it all the time, the John Cooper reference, right? Like we grew up around hearing that, and it was like, what? This guy from Arizona State who killed it, and then he had tremendous success at Ohio State, but just couldn't or didn't win the big game, or the game as they like to call it in Michigan, Ohio State. I think it's been really fun for me to be the new guy in the Big Ten, because I'm coming at it from a totally fresh lens. Like I don't have this scarred lens of like what should happen, what has happened. I'm like, Ryan Day is a hell of a coach, 66-10. And we know football well enough to know that like it could be a kick, it could be 2 kicks, right? It could be a couple snaps. And that's a difference between a whole conversation. It could be a penalty, a non-penalty. Like there's so many little things that to me often give a coach too much praise or too much blame. And as Chip Kelly famously said, 5-star QB, right? Praise and blame are all the same. But here's the thing I do feel is that I felt watching the game that it was tight. Of course, there's tension. It was a rivalry game. I thought Ohio State's sideline was tight, right? It's been, leave no doubt, it's been unfinished business. It's been intense. Ryan Day's an intense guy who I'm a huge fan of. He also contributed to the book 5-star QB. I cannot sit here and say Ohio State should make a move. I think that's ludicrous. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's passionate. I think that it's full of fandom, things that we love about the game. But I think it's beyond preposterous to think that Ohio State should make a move on their head coach. It's a healthy program, folks. It's a thriving program. I get it. You haven't beaten that rival, though. I get it. It's been a minute. I go the other way. And I read Bruce Feldman's article. I'd recommend everybody read it in The Athletic. And it was the inverse. It was, does Ryan Day want to keep doing this? Does he want to still deal with this, right? I'll go to a story, and I almost wrote this in the newsletter, so I got no problem sharing it on the back half of this podcast. And I don't want to say the names because I haven't asked to do it. But I'm telling you 2 stories of 2 coaches' kids. One, coach was fired when this young man was in junior high in 8th grade from a huge job. And somebody gets on the loudspeaker of that school and says, breaking news, so-and-so has been fired, in that tone. And the school breaks out in an eruption of cheers. His son is sitting in class. Another story, a coach is not winning, struggling, and it's the holidays, and somebody throws a brick through their front window of their home on Christmas Day. Like I say that of like, maybe they are dramatic, but the version of that now is on your social media. But the version of it now is like, maybe it's not a physical brick, but it's a spiritual brick. It's one that gets into your head. It's a digital brick. Like it's not okay. And I get that it's part of it, but I do think, and Ryan Day courageously and vulnerably shared like how hard it is on his family in advance of the game this past weekend. And that's where I go. Like part of me, like I want Oregon to run the table. I want them to play Arizona State in the national championship game. Like if I could have my druthers, that's what it would be. Why not? Right. But if that is not the case, and if it's not or any of the schools from the lens of the West Coast out here, I hope Ohio State runs the table. And part of me hopes that Ryan Day says, you know what, afterwards, like I'm going to take a break. To think that people think that's a logical thought because you can't win that game. I get it. Maybe it's a Yogi, you don't know Midwest football. You don't know the vitriol, the rivalry. No, I get it. I get the passion, guys. Like I've been in college football for a long time, but I also want to be thoughtful. And I just think that what he's done with players, how players talk about him, how quarterbacks talk about him, how his staff members talk about him, like it's a really healthy place. And I think now more than ever in the sport, we need health. We need healthy cultures. More of them, the better. I talked about Brent Brennan earlier. Healthy culture for that program. You got to win. I get it. But he's 66-10, folks. And a good field goal away from winning a natty a couple years ago, beating Georgia in the CFP. 2 field goals, maybe some less wind away from winning that game over the weekend. Whatever. He didn't. I get that. But regardless, really cool conversation with Doug Lesmerises. We'll have him on again. We did a home and home with him, so check out their show. We went on to talk about college football from the lens of the West. He comes on to talk about college football from the lens of the North. I'm heading north, the Cali Flock, heading to Eugene, and away we go. So we'll have a report from that later this week. We'll have some cool social media content. We'll have our next episode will be a big-time preview of the Big Ten championship game, the Big 12 championship game, and of course, we will touch on all of the championship games because they kick off on Friday night with the Mountain West championship game, and we got a Heisman conversation to have. So there's Jim. I'm Yogi. Appreciate you letting me vent a little bit, Jim. You're a good man.
It's therapeutic.
Yeah, it's a good man.
It's been a crazy season. You got to get that out.
Yeah, and I hope that it comes across thoughtful. And if not, call us out. Got no problem hearing that. All right, lots of love. I'm out. Peace.